Welcome to the Cozy Historian. If you find yourself drifting off before the story ends, that's perfectly fine. Just remember to like and subscribe before you fall asleep. It helps these quiet journeys through time softly continue. And before your eyes grow heavy, tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what's the last thing you did before bed? Tonight, we're traveling back to the very beginning of rest itself. So fluff your pillow, pull up your blanket, and let's drift back to the world's very first bed. Now, as you settle in, keep that thought of rest close, like a warm quilt around your shoulders. Because tonight, instead of looking only at what people slept on, we're going to listen in on what they dreamed of when they were awake. The quiet, trembling hopes poured into ink and sealed in wax. Tonight, we slip softly into the gaslit world of Victorian love letters and the secret codes they carried. Imagine for a moment that the screen in front of you fades. The blue light dims into a gentler glow, and in its place you see a small room. Somewhere in England, around the middle of the 19th century. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender. A single lamp, its glass chimney haloed with soot, casts a golden circle of light over a wooden writing desk. At that desk sits a woman in a high-necked dress the color of watered cream. Her hair is coiled at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping in soft rebellion. On the desk lie sheets of thick ivory paper, a bottle of ink, a quill sharpened to a fine point, and, off to one side, a tiny pile of dried violets, pressed flat and fragrant. The house beyond the door is not entirely quiet. Somewhere downstairs, someone moves a chair. In the street outside, a carriage rattles past. But here, at the small island of lamplight, the world has narrowed to a single task: to write what cannot safely be spoken aloud. She knows that this letter might be read by other eyes before it reaches its intended hands. A mother, a father, a curious maid, perhaps even a nosy younger brother. So each word must be chosen with care. Nothing too direct, too warm, too revealing. And yet there must be something in it that will make his heart quicken when he reads it. Something that says, "I am thinking of you. I am waiting," without ever quite admitting it. So she dips the quill into ink. And as the excess falls away, she pauses, listening to her own breathing. You can almost hear it with her. In, out, slow, steady. The tip of the feather touches the page. The first line appears. "My dear Mr. Harrow." Already, the letter is a kind of code. Not his first name. Oh no, that would be too bold. "My dear" is already skating near the edge of what is considered appropriate. Her hand trembles slightly, but she goes on. She writes of the weather, of the health of her aunt, of a recent concert to which she was taken by her cousin, all very calm, very proper, very unremarkable. And yet, if you listen closely, you can hear the pulse beneath the words. She describes the music in more detail than necessary. She remembers the way the light from the chandelier caught on the polished instruments, and says it reminded her of a certain conversation about sonatas. He will know which conversation he will remember that evening on the terrace, when they spoke more freely than perhaps they should have. This is how a Victorian love letter breathes, with layers. The surface is smooth, polite, soothing to any passerby, but beneath, like a second text written between the lines, lies the true message, visible only to the one who has the key. Now let us give her a name, this careful writer. Let us call her Clara, and the man who waits for her letters, Mr. James Harrow. They are not engaged. They have, officially, no understanding. They have only met at a handful of dinners, a few walks under chaperoned supervision, and one very long afternoon when a sudden rainstorm forced them all to shelter together under an inconveniently small awning. Yet in those few moments, when hands brushed while passing a shawl, when eyes met and looked away and then returned, something took root. Clara's parents see James as a respectable, if not particularly wealthy, young man. They approve of his manners, his conversation, his prospects in the law. They would not object, in time, to a proposal. But they would certainly object to clandestine letters, too early and too bold. Clara knows this, James knows it too. And yet the post exists. It is punctual, discreet, and, for the price of a penny stamp, willing to carry a heart across town. The arrival of the penny post in the 1840s changed the rhythm of daily life. Imagine an age in which letters had once been expensive things, charged by the page, weighed by distance, and sometimes paid for by the person receiving them. Then imagine suddenly being able to fold your thoughts, seal them, and send them almost anywhere in Britain for a single penny, paid in advance. The postman's knock began to sound not just like business and official notice, but like possibility, hope, disappointment, joy, all wrapped in the same small envelope. In crowded London streets, people watched for the red-coated letter carrier, the way we might now watch for a glowing notification or a buzzing phone. For Clara and James, the knock at the door might mean everything. But because letters are so easy to send, they also become easy to intercept. And so a whole culture of invisible writing, of suggestion and symbol, grows quietly alongside the flourishing postal service, the Victorians, who love rules and love bending them, become masters of saying much while appearing to say very little. Look now at Clara again, still seated at her desk. She has reached the end of the polite part of her letter. She has written of weather and music, cousins and walks, all things that would look harmless if the letter were read aloud at the breakfast table. Now she lets herself pause. Her eyes rest on the neat paragraphs. She can leave it here, sign it with a safely cool, "Yours sincerely," and know that she has not crossed any lines. But she also knows that James will read this letter alone, in his small lodging near the Inns of Court, perhaps by the light of a candle stub that has already served him through many late studies. She imagines his face when he breaks the seal. She imagines the way he will look for some sign that she has thought of him, particularly him, and not just filled a page with obligations. So she adds one more sentence. I find, as the evenings grow longer, that the hours between the post and the next day's delivery feel very wide indeed. On its own, it is still innocuous. She could be speaking of boredom, of restlessness in the long winter dusk. But James will know. He will hear her saying, "I wait for your letters, and I miss you in the spaces between them." She signs the letter, not yours sincerely, but ever yours, C.M. Ever yours. Not always. Not yet. But ever has a softness, a constancy to it, as if the future has already stretched out and accepted this quiet devotion as part of its pattern. She sands the ink, folds the paper along practiced lines, and reaches for an envelope already addressed. On the small table by her elbow sits a stick of sealing wax and a little brass seal with her initials entwined. The wax is deep red. The seal, when pressed, leaves a simple but elegant mark, CM surrounded by a laurel wreath. She warms the wax in the candle's edge, lets the drops fall, and then presses the seal carefully into the cooling pool. The impression is neat, no stray edges, no cracks. She feels a small, private satisfaction. It is a comfort to control something in a life with so many rules. Before she rises, she touches a fingertip to the little pile of dried violets. For a moment, she considers slipping one inside the letter. Violets speak of modest affection, quiet devotion. It would be a tender gesture, a fragrant secret. But the house is not so large, and there are sharp eyes. Instead, she picks up one petal, grinds it gently between her fingers, and rubs the faint dust along the edge of the paper. When James opens it, perhaps there will be just the slightest hint of that scent, as if the letter has passed through the air that surrounds her. Out in the street, the world continues. Horses clatter over cobblestones, vendors call, a church bell murmurs the hour. Clara steps out with her letter carefully hidden in the pocket of her cloak. She walks as if on an ordinary errand. A short distance, a turn, another corner, and then there it is, the small, red-painted post-box set into the wall. She glances once over her shoulder, more from habit than from real fear, and slips the envelope through the slot. It vanishes from view with a soft, final sound. Now we follow the letter. Into the belly of the post-box it falls, joining others from young men, old women, merchants, teachers, soldiers and schoolchildren. Something about the darkness in there is comforting, all these private worlds. All these voices in paper form, mingling for a moment before being sorted back into separate destinies. Later that evening, when the lamplighters make their rounds and dusk thickens into night, a postman with chilled hands unlocks the box and gathers the letters into his bag. The smell of paper and ink rises around him, subtle but familiar. He does not know that one of these envelopes contains a young woman's hope, another perhaps a bill that will cause anxiety, another an invitation that will change the course of someone's life. He only knows that they must all be sorted, stamped, and sent on their way. At the sorting office, under harsh light and the clatter of machinery, the enchantment of Clara's writing desk might seem far away. Yet even here, in this industrial hum, there is a kind of magic. Letters are stacked, tied, stamped, and redirected, like thoughts being organized in a vast, mechanical brain. The address in James's careful script, Mr. James Harrow, Chambers near Lincoln's Inn, finds its pile before dawn. Another postman lifts it with gloved fingers and sets out into the grey London morning. Now, picture James. He is not wealthy, but he is determined. His rooms are small but tidy. Books sit in determined little towers on his desk. A law textbook lies open, face down, as if sacrificed mid-argument. His coat hangs over the back of a chair. His hat, brushed but not new, rests on the mantelpiece. The fire has burned low during the night. When he wakes, the air is cold enough that his breath hangs in it for a moment before dissolving. His first thought, as so often, is the post. He dresses quickly, runs a hand through hair that has never quite learned to lie flat, and goes downstairs to listen for the sound he hopes for. A brisk knock, a shuffle of boots, the thump of letters on the hall table. When at last it comes, his heart gives a rather undignified leap. He waits, trying to appear casual, as the landlady collects her share and leaves the rest. When he judges it not too obvious, he goes to see what fortune has brought. There it is. His own name, written in a hand he has come to recognize instantly, even at a distance. The sight of Clara's script sends a quiet warmth through him. He does not open the letter in the hall. That would be sacrilegious. Instead, he carries it back up to his room as if it were something fragile and easily spooked. The act of opening it is slow, deliberate. He turns it over, considering it for a moment as an object. The smoothness of the paper, the rich red of the wax, the imprint of her initials. It is, in a small way, like holding her hand, or at least something that has been held by her. Then he breaks the seal carefully, so that he might later keep both envelope and letter intact in the little bundle he keeps tied with ribbon in his drawer. He reads the letter once, quickly, letting the sentences wash over him. Then he reads it again, slower, pausing over certain phrases. The mention of the concert, the line about the evenings growing longer, the delicate, ever yours. He smiles, a little sadly, at how hard they both work not to say what they mean, and at how clearly they say it all the same. James, too, knows the art of writing around the edges of things. When he takes up his own pen to reply, he is as careful in his way as Clara in hers. He thanks her for her last letter. He speaks of his cases and his studies, of a particularly absurd speech made by a senior barrister that had the young clerks biting their tongues to keep from laughing. He makes a mild joke about the weather, which has produced a kind of shapeless damp that feels, he says, like living inside a wet sock. But then he, too, adds something more. He writes, I find that the postman is the only person whose punctuality I never mind, and that the sound of his step in the hall has become the chief ornament of my mornings. It is, like Clara's line, innocent enough on the surface. Yet both of them now participate fully in this shared code, this exchange of double-voiced sentences. The letter is folded, sealed, with a simple J.H. pressed into dark blue wax, and sent on its way. As their correspondence continues, they become bolder in quiet ways. James, who has read more than his fair share of detective novels and treatises, devises a little system for themselves. He suggests in one letter that the placement of the postage stamp might convey a tiny additional message, something plausible but still private. If the stamp sits in the upper right corner, Neatly aligned, the letter is merely ordinary, or as ordinary as any letter between them can be. If it's tilted slightly to the left, it means, "Today I miss you more than usual." To the right, "I am hopeful." Upside down, in the upper right corner, "I am anxious. Write soon." And if ever the stamp should appear in the lower right corner, it will mean, "I have something important to tell you in person." It is, he tells her, a frivolous little game. Nothing more. But of course they both know it is not frivolous at all. It is a way of letting their hearts speak silently. Even before the envelope is opened, Clara copies his little key into the back of her diary, smiling as she does so. From that day on, each time she receives a letter, her eyes go first not to the handwriting, but to the little square in the corner, as if it were the weather vane of his mood. In one letter, the stamp tips just a little to the left. "Today I miss you more than usual." She touches that edge before she opens the envelope, as if that small square has warmed in his hands and remembered it. There are other codes, too, buried in the text. A mention of a book they have both read stands in for a thought they are not free to express. A shared reference to a particular poem, perhaps one about longing or patience, becomes a private reminder that they have both read the same lines, felt the same ache, and emerged with the same courage. Even the ink sometimes carries meaning. When one day she writes in violet ink rather than black, he wonders if she is hinting at the shy, tender significance that colour has acquired among the young ladies of her acquaintance. Beyond Clara and James, the whole Victorian world hums with similar secrets. In parlours and bedrooms, in boarding houses and vicarages, people sit at their desks, pouring themselves out into letters that must look perfectly modest. A young governess writes to a friend, confessing her loneliness in an attic room where the wind speaks louder than anyone else in the house. A soldier at a distant posting writes to his mother and slips, almost accidentally, into addressing the girl who waved him goodbye at the station. Brothers drift apart or grow closer in ink. Sisters share recipes, gossip, and consolation between the lines of carefully ruled pages. Letter writing is not a quick process. It takes time to think, time to choose words, time to form each letter by hand. That slowness is part of its intimacy. You cannot dash off a quick passion without feeling your heart beat in every stroke of the pen. And once it is written, you cannot call it back. The envelope carries it away, and the only thing left to do is wait. Clara feels this wait as a physical thing. Some mornings, when the postman's step echoes on the path and then continues past their house, she feels a little sinking inside her chest. Not today, then. Perhaps tomorrow. She tells herself not to be foolish, that she is a grown woman and has other things to occupy her mind. But the quiet, empty place remains, like a chair at the table that ought to be filled, and is not. On the days when a letter does arrive, she cannot open it at once, not in the breakfast room with her parents. She slips it beneath a book or tucks it into her sleeve, her heart beating faster as she pretends to listen to her father's remarks about the paper. Only when she can retreat to her own room or to a corner of the garden does she allow herself the pleasure of breaking the seal and unfolding the page. There is something exquisitely tactile in this ritual. The crackle of paper, the faint scent of ink, the way the letter holds the shape of its folding, like the memory of its journey. When she reads his words, his presence in her life becomes more solid, more real. She can imagine his hand moving across the page, pausing to find the right word, perhaps blotting a stray drop of ink. She can almost see him frown in concentration, or smile at his own jest, with no one there to see him but the letter itself. Some nights she places his letters in a small box and keeps it by her bed. The house settles into sleep around her. The fading clatter of dishes below, the quiet creak of floorboards, the distant rumble of a carriage. She lies awake, the letters beside her like stored sunshine. If she cannot speak to him, cannot see him, cannot even say his name aloud without inviting questions, at least she can rest in the nearness of the words he has already trusted to her. James, for his part, has his own small hoard. His letters from Clara are tied with a length of faded blue ribbon, a ribbon that once adorned a bouquet at a ball where he saw her across the room and did not quite dare to reach her. He keeps them in the drawer of his desk, under his law books and case notes. Sometimes, late at night, when his eyes blur from reading statute after statute, he closes the heavy volumes and replaces them with the slender folding pages filled with her careful script. The change from legal argument to personal confession is like stepping from a crowded street into a quiet glade. He learns the constellations of her handwriting, the way some people learn the stars, the slight flourish on her capital C, the way her M leans, just a little, as if eager to move forward. Now and then a word trails off, as if her thoughts moved faster than her pen, and he feels a tender fondness for that glimpse of spontaneity. In one letter he sees a faint smear where a drop of water fell and spread the ink. Was it rain, he wonders, or perhaps a tear? He will never know, but whichever it was, it has become part of the letter's map of feeling. Around them, the larger world continues its own conversation. Newspapers are filled with debates about politics and empire, scientific discoveries and social reforms. The telegraph clicks across great distances, carrying messages in a language of dots and dashes. To some, this seems like the future. Swift, efficient, almost miraculous. But for all its usefulness, the telegraph cannot replace the slow, deliberate, handcrafted intimacy of a letter written by candlelight. Clara and James sometimes speak of this difference in their correspondence. He jokes that if he could, he would telegraph her once an hour just to say, "Still thinking of you, stop. Still hoping you are well. Stop." She replies that she would rather wait 3 days for a letter that smells faintly of his lodging, that wears the marks of his fingertips, that carries in every loop of ink the proof that he has sat, quietly, and thought of her long enough to fill a page. There are obstacles, of course. The Victorian world, for all its fascination with romance in novels, is wary of it in life. Parents watch, clergy advise, neighbors observe. A single intercepted letter could cause trouble, so their codes deepen. They allude to things. They reference shared experiences instead of naming feelings. They trust that the other will hear what is being whispered beneath what is said. One winter, Clara's family travels to the countryside for several months to stay with relatives. The village is small, the post unreliable. Snow clogs the roads. Days pass with no letters, then weeks. The silence stretches, and the wide hours between deliveries become almost unbearable. Clara walks in the cold fields and tells herself that he must be writing, that his letters are simply delayed. She imagines them sitting in some distant post office in a pile, waiting for the thaw. At last, after nearly 3 weeks, a single letter arrives. She sees the London postmark and feels a rush of relief, so strong it makes her knees weak. The stamp in the upper right corner is placed not straight, but at a hopeful angle. She laughs quietly, alone in the hallway, and presses the envelope to her lips before slipping it into her pocket. When she reads it, she discovers that he, too, has been counting the days, that he has been haunted by the image of his letters stranded somewhere in a snowdrift. He has even written out a little schedule, listing the dates on which he posted each one, as if by documenting them, he can summon them back into reality. In response, she composes a letter longer than any she has yet written to him. She describes the countryside, the bare trees etched against a pale sky, the crunch of frost beneath her boots, the way the smoke from the chimneys hangs in the air like a second, ghostly village. She tells him that she has taken to rising early just to watch for the mail cart cresting the hill. At the end of the letter, without quite intending to, she adds a line that is almost shockingly direct for her. "You must know," she writes, "that your letters are the only interruptions in these days that feel truly my own." When James reads that sentence, he feels something inside him settle into certainty. He has wondered sometimes whether he imagines too much, reads too generously between the lines. But here, at last, is a phrase that seems to stand in the open field of meaning. The only interruptions that feel truly my own. He reads it several times, letting the significance gather. That evening, he writes a reply in which he mentions, for the first time, the idea of a future that might not depend so heavily on ink and paper. He treads carefully. He does not offer anything that could be construed as a formal proposal. He knows too well the economic realities, the expectations of her family, the fragility of his own career at this early stage. But he allows himself a single paragraph in which he writes of an imaginary day years hence, when perhaps they will sit at a table together and read aloud some of their old letters, laughing gently at how solemn they were, how cautious, how earnestly they circled around their feelings like shy dancers. He might as well have written, "I wish to marry you some day." Clara hears it that way. She sits with the letter in her lap, the words swimming a little before her eyes. The lamp at her elbow sputters softly, protesting the hour. Somewhere in the house, a clock strikes 10. She folds the letter carefully, but before she puts it away, she presses her palm over that paragraph, as if to warm it, to impress it more deeply into the page and into herself. Not every Victorian love story carried by the post ends happily. Some letters are never answered. Some are returned unread. Some are found after their writer has gone, too late to change anything. But the beauty of the letters between Clara and James is not only in whether they eventually marry, but in the way their relationship exists in language itself. Each letter is a small piece of time, preserved. Each page is a day, a mood, a glimpse of a self that might otherwise have vanished into memory. The historian in you, perhaps, begins to stir here. If you imagine some future scholar opening a box in an attic, dust motes swirling, hinges creaking, you can see them lifting these letters carefully, unfolding them like pressed flowers. The ink has browned, the edges crisped, but the words are still legible. The scholar reads them, and for a moment the room around them melts away. They are standing instead in Clara's bedroom, in James's modest lodging at the post office counter. The voices of the past speak again. In this way, love letters are a kind of time machine. They carry not only emotion, but detail, the price of bread, the complaint about weather, the mention of a local scandal, the description of a dress or a hat or a new kind of omnibus. All the things that seemed too ordinary to record elsewhere find their home between greetings and farewells. And so, long after the lovers themselves have faded from living memory, their world remains captured on paper. If you were to write such a letter tonight, what would you include? What small, ordinary detail might one day fascinate someone who never met you? The light of your phone screen, perhaps, reflected on your pillow, the quiet hum of a refrigerator, the way cars whisper past, outside like distant waves. To you, these might seem too mundane to mention. To someone a century from now, they might feel as exotic as gas lamps and horse-drawn cabs feel to us. The Victorians did not know that we would someday read their letters, study their codes, marvel at their restraint. They wrote not for posterity, but for one person at a time. One beloved, one friend, one child far from home. And maybe that is why their letters feel so alive. They were never meant to be performative. They are, in a gentle way, the most private kind of literature. Clara and James continue to write, month after month, year after year. Their lives change around the letters. James gains a more secure position. His cases bring him modest success. Clara's younger siblings grow up. Her parents grow older. There are illnesses, recoveries, celebrations, quiet disappointments. All of these things make their way into the letters in fragments. Sometimes the letters slow, not because feelings have cooled, but because life has pressed in close. Days at the law office stretch long for James Clara's duties. At home multiply when a relative falls ill. But they keep writing, even if the pages are shorter, the lines more hurried. There is, in the very persistence of the correspondence, a promise. I still think of you, even when I have nothing grand to say. At last, there comes a day when a different kind of letter is written. This one is not coded. It is not layered in metaphor or modesty. It is addressed to Clara's father, and it is written in James's most formal, most carefully composed hand. It asks, with proper humility but unmistakable clarity, for permission to speak openly to Clara about joining their lives. Even here, even now, the rituals of ink and paper shape their fate. The letter must travel, be received, be considered. Clara waits with a stillness that hides a storm. James waits with the peculiar mix of dread and hope that only a written request can create. There are no quick clarifying conversations, no instant follow-up messages to explain what one really meant. There is only the letter, and the time in which it is read and reread, weighed and pondered. When at last the reply comes, a letter in an older man's steady hand, cautious but not unkind, granting permission to call, Clara feels as if the whole world has suddenly become larger rooms that once felt like cages, now feel like stages on which her future might unfold. James, reading the same words by a different fire, allows himself, for perhaps the first time, to imagine her sitting across from him at his own table, not as a visitor, but as a companion. We could follow them further, to proposals and vows, to a new home where perhaps the postman's knock brings bills and advertisements and letters from distant cousins. We could imagine them keeping their old letters in a drawer, bringing them out on quiet evenings to read to each other, laughing at their youthful caution, touched by the constancy that survived between the lines. Or we could imagine a more solemn ending, where fate intervenes, and the letters are all that remain. But perhaps it is kinder for this bedtime journey simply to leave them at the threshold of a new chapter, their hands almost touching, their secret codes no longer quite so necessary. Instead, let us drift backward a little, zooming out from Clara's desk, from James's lodging, from the smoky post office, to see the Victorian world as a series of tiny islands of lamplight, each with a person seated at a table, pen in hand. All of them are writing to someone. All of them are trusting their truest words to fragile sheets of paper. A widow writes to a son in the Navy, folding her pride and her worry together in the same sentence. Two sisters separated by marriage write of recipes, of dresses, of babies' first words, all of which add up quietly to, "I miss you." A young man away at school writes to his mother that he is eating well and studying hard when, in fact, he is lonely and frightened. But the very act of writing stabilizes him, as if the ink itself were a spine. The postman walks from house to house under the dim blur of gaslight, his bag heavy with these little packets of courage and confession. He may not know it, but he is a kind of messenger of dreams, carrying invisible threads that tie people together across miles and months. And you, lying here, listening, are connected to them too. Not by wax seals and stamps, but by something older and more delicate. The desire to be heard by someone far away. The comfort of carefully chosen words. The quiet hope that, somewhere beyond your immediate surroundings, another mind is turning over your sentences with care. Perhaps there is a letter you have kept, or an old message saved somewhere in your devices, that you read again when you need to remember that you were seen, that you mattered to someone. In that, you are not so different from Clara, with her ribbon-tied bundle, from James with his secret drawer. If you close your eyes for a moment, you might imagine reaching into a wooden box and lifting out a stack of letters. The paper is cool and textured under your fingers. The ink has faded to a soft brown, like tea stirred with milk. When you hold the pages up, you can almost smell coal dust and starch and lavender. You unfold one of the letters and see the opening line. My dear. Someone's heart, from long ago, steps quietly into the room. History can be loud, full of battles and speeches and great events, but it can also be as small and soft as this. A single person, alone at a desk, writing by candlelight to someone they love tonight. We have chosen to listen to that smaller history, to sit beside the writer as the quill moves, to listen to the rustle as the letter slips into its envelope and begins its slow journey outward. As you drift toward sleep, you might imagine that somewhere, in some other time, a Victorian correspondent has just laid down their pen, sanded the ink, and blown gently across the page. The candle flickers. The room grows a little dimmer. Outside, the street grows quiet. In the hush that follows, the letter cools, the wax hardens, and another thread is added to the vast, invisible web that connects heart to heart across distance. And so, dear listener, as the candles fade and the night deepens, may your dreams be filled with the soft echoes of history. Until next time, sleep well